Just thinking about panpsychism and revisiting some ideas which I think I was kicking around a couple of years ago now, but if I did, they were on a crappy phone camera I used to use at the time. Yeah, panpsychism, term from Fechner, 150 years ago. The idea that that mind or psyche is best regarded as a kind of out there in the world process, found now in the works of people like David Chalmers, where he repurposes it as consciousness, but says it's basically a kind of primitive out there in the world, in the way that space is a primitive, or the matter and extension of primitives. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's about terribly. Yeah, I don't buy into it myself, but I do think we have a tendency to be panpsychists, which I talked about in my previous video. You know, I think there's a fair amount of evidence to suggest that babies are naturally kind of panpsychists, feeling that you know, because they don't have a solid boundary between themselves and the world, that hasn't kicked in yet, but they do have a sense of agency, they do have a sense of mind, that mind is just felt to be everywhere, in the way that space is just kind of felt to be everywhere. So that's panpsychism. Yeah, a couple of things about that really. I mean, it's so natural to us, I think, that I don't think we notice it. I mean, I think, you know, I'm guessing to a certain extent here, although some of it's grounded in what I've come across. I mean, obviously, as we mature, we don't routinely consider the world as a kind of panpsychic entity. Usually, we attribute psychology to ourselves and to other people, and we have a sense of ownership of our own psychology, and maybe even imagining it happening just inside our heads. You know what I mean? Which, to all intents and purposes, I think it mostly does. At least, you know, 99.999% of the processing happens there anyway. So we don't, you know, we don't routinely attribute the world at large to, at least consciously, to having a kind of psyche. We attribute it to individuals or to animals, occasionally to entities like cars and machines. You know, we make mistakes, and computers particularly, and to other people, of course, and to ourselves, but not usually to the world at large. But having said that, I think there is a sense in which, you know, just working in the background of our minds, I think there probably is a little bit of panpsychism just ticking away there. And the reason why I say that is, although we don't notice it in its presence, you know, we're not presently aware of it happening, I think we would notice it if it went away. You know what I mean? I think if that background, covert sense of the world being a little bit psychic, having a little bit of psychology in it, if that went away, we'd notice. And I think we did notice it in people like, well, certainly some people who suffer from autism spectrum disorder, those kind of things, autistic people. Some of the reports from those people suggest that whilst they feel like they're alive, they have this overpowering sense that the world around them is dead, which doesn't make any sense to us. We don't walk around through a dead world because we're so used to it having this kind of background hum of slight liveliness, even though we're not aware of it. But apparently some autistic people do that. I think there's a really interesting woman called Temple Grandin, who's quite a high-functioning autistic person. She designs slaughterhouses, which is really interesting, because she has a particular insight into the psychology of cattle. But one of the things that she talks about is how dead the world sometimes is, and how dead other people are. You know what I mean? She doesn't even do the mind thing in other people. She gives this great story about sitting around the dinner table with her family and experiencing them as just kind of stuffed sacks of skin draped across these chairs. You know, she doesn't do that seeing people as a live thing that is so routine to us. And similarly, the little background current of that's going on in the world, she doesn't notice that either. So the world is slightly dead. Philip K. Dick, science fiction author, writes really well about that as well. And he was a bit strange, and there's perhaps a little bit of evidence that he suffered from that himself. One of his biographies quotes him saying, you know, "I am alive and you are dead." It's one of the things he experienced. I am alive and you are dead. You know, that he was that the only living thing in his world was himself, which we have, but we, you know, the sense is that there is this kind of background hum of liveness that we don't get really, because it's there all the time, like the smell of oxygen. We just wouldn't get it. And in fact, in some of his stories, Philip K. Dick has characters who enter that world. I think there's one character, I think it's in a book called Eye in the Sky, something like that. I might be getting confused here. But this character lives in a place called Tomb World, and that's why she describes it. Tomb World. That the world of her experience is dead to her in a way that we can't really imagine, because we don't feel that the world is alive to us, but it kind of is, and we'd probably notice it if it went away. Which doesn't mean to say it's really alive. I'm not arguing the case for panpsychism as a real thing, by the way. I hope that's obvious. But just as a phenomenon, a phenomenon which babies seem to have naturally, come into the world as a very early or very quickly develop a kind of panpsychism as a first draft of what reality is like. And there's a little trace of that left, even when that psyche becomes located within themselves and attributed to other people. There's still traces of it left in the world at large. But if you're autistic, sometimes at least, it doesn't, and the world just becomes a dead place. Any other examples from that? Well, I guess the converse would be when we suddenly become aware of it. You know, some spiritual experiences or some meditative experience, or just some strange experience. Jill Bolte Taylor had that talk on TED Talks, you know, when she has a stroke, and that stroke seems to do something strange to the boundaries, to a sense of the boundaries of her own being, and she feels her mind expanding to fill the space available, you know, just like a gas just suddenly expanding to fill the space, and she feels this sense of immensity and you know, relates it in a really positive way, even though it's crippling as what happens to her. But again, there's something quite panpsychist about that, at least in spirit, I think, that the mind has ceased, that process called mind, which for good reasons we usually attribute to and serves the need of an individual, collapses into a more broad-based experience, a dislocated experience in the most literal sense of that term, and becomes attributed to the world at large. Yeah, I mean, that's not pantheism. I'm talking about panpsychism. I think pantheism has some relationship to that, or panentheism probably more accurately, when that mind at large starts to look like an authoritative or nurturing parent, perhaps.